A little girl runs out crying to a delivery driver, begging for help. Moments later, the entire street is swarmed with police. But what the child reveals shatters the quiet neighborhood's facade and leads to a shocking chain of events. Stay with us as we uncover the dark secrets that turned an ordinary morning into a life-altering rescue mission. Before we dive into this gripping story, take a moment to comment below where you're tuning in from today. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more unforgettable stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Keenan Daniels adjusted the mirror in his delivery van, watching the peaceful suburban street stretch before him. The hum of his engine filled the silence as he reviewed his delivery schedule on the dashboard screen. It was 8:20 a.m. and he was already running late. He blamed the delay on a faulty GPS and a misloaded package earlier that morning. His employer's strict timelines weighed heavily on his mind. As a delivery driver for 3 years, Keenan knew the rhythms of his route. Brightwood Grove was one of his favorite neighborhoods, quiet, orderly, with manicured lawns and friendly residents who often waved as he passed. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic city streets he navigated in the early days of his career, yet something about this morning felt off. Keenan slowed his van as he approached a familiar house on Elmwood Drive. He recognized the family, a woman named Hannah Whitaker and her daughter Ellie. Over time, he'd grown accustomed to their warm greetings and occasional offers of water or snacks on hot days. But as he parked in front of their driveway to deliver a package, he noticed the atmosphere was different. The front door opened, and Hannah and Ellie stepped out. Keenan leaned out of his window, flashing his usual cheerful grin. "Morning, Mrs. Whitaker," he called. Hannah responded with a distracted nod, her face pale, her steps hurried. Ellie clung to her mother's side, her eyes cast downward. The child, usually chatty and energetic, now seemed withdrawn. Keenan's greeting hung in the air unanswered as the pair disappeared into the house. Keenan frowned, a knot forming in his stomach. He shook his head, trying to dismiss his unease. "Not my business," he muttered, lifting the package from the passenger seat. But as he walked toward the door, he couldn't help but notice the unusual silence that seemed to envelop the home. The driveway was littered with small shards of glass that sparkled in the sunlight. Keenan paused, his eyes scanning for their source, but nothing stood out. He left the package on the porch and returned to his van, brushing off his concern. The bag of packages on the seat next to him felt heavier than usual, as if a physical manifestation of the moral dilemma he now faced. He tried to refocus on the task at hand, moving house to house, scanning delivery codes and setting packages on doorsteps. But his mind was elsewhere, consumed by the unsettling events of the morning. 5 stops later, Keenan found himself pulling up to another familiar house. The rhythmic barking of a neighbor's dog filled the air as he stepped out of the van, scanning his next delivery. The motions were automatic: retrieve the package, confirm the address, leave it neatly on the porch. But his thoughts were miles away. Without warning, a blur of motion darted into his peripheral vision. Keenan froze as Ellie appeared from between 2 parked cars, her small frame trembling as she clung to his leg. "Please help," she cried, her voice cracking. Keenan crouched to her level, gently placing the package on the ground. "Ellie, what are you doing here? Are you hurt?" The little girl shook her head but pointed back toward her house. Her hand trembled and her breath came in shallow gasps. She was wearing a pale pink dress, one that looked like it had been ironed with care, but the contrast of her disheveled hair and swollen eyes made her distress unmistakable. Keenan's heart sank. "What's wrong? Where's your mom?" Ellie struggled to speak through her sobs. "I'm scared." Before Keenan could process her words, the sound of a door slamming cut through the air. He turned to see a man stepping out of the Whitaker house, his strides long and deliberate. The man was tall and sharply dressed, his tailored suit at odds with the chaos brewing in his expression. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes burned with anger as they locked on Ellie. "Ha ha ha ha, Ellie!" the man barked, his voice booming. "Get over here, now!" Keenan instinctively stepped between Ellie and the man, shielding her with his body. "Sir, she's upset, I think," she said. "I don't care what you think," the man snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. His gaze flicked to Keenan's delivery uniform. "And who do you think you are, interfering in my family's business? You deliver boxes. Stick to that." Ellie's grip on Keenan's leg tightened, her trembling worsened, and she buried her face against him. Keenan forced himself to stay calm, even as anger bubbled beneath his calm exterior. "Sir, your daughter came to me for help," Keenan said, his voice measured but firm. "She's scared. I just want to make sure she's okay." The man's face twisted with a cruel smirk. "Help? From you?" he sneered. "What could a delivery driver possibly do to help anyone? You're nothing but a courier. Don't overstep." Ellie whimpered, her small voice barely audible. "Don't let him take me." Keenan's resolve hardened. He crouched down to Ellie's level, his voice soft but steady. "Ellie, you're safe with me. Just tell me what's wrong." The man took another step forward, his presence looming. "This is your last warning," he growled. "Give me my daughter, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for kidnapping." "Call them," Keenan shot back, his voice unwavering. "Because when they get here, I'll make sure they hear what Ellie has to say." Keenan's words of audacity brought a flicker of hesitation to the man's face. His aggressive posture faltered, replaced by a flash of uncertainty. Keenan caught it instantly, a crack in the man's facade. Ellie clung tighter to Keenan, her voice breaking. "Please, don't let him take me. I can't go back in there." Keenan glanced down at her tear-streaked face, his heart breaking. Whatever was happening in that house, it was more than he could ignore. His instincts screamed at him to protect her, no matter the cost. The man jabbed a finger toward Keenan. "You'll regret this," he spat before retreating to the house. He slammed the door shut behind him, but Keenan knew this wasn't over. Ellie remained by his side, her small body trembling. Keenan crouched down again, looking into her wide, fearful eyes. "Ellie," he said gently, "I need you to tell me what's happening." "Why are you so scared?" The girl hesitated, her lips trembling before she whispered, "He hurts Mom, and he said he'll hurt me if I tell." Keenan felt a chill run through him. His mind raced as he pieced together the implications of her words. This was no longer just a bad feeling. This was a situation that required immediate action. Keenan took a deep breath, determination hardening his features. "Ellie, I'm going to make sure you're safe," he promised. "I need you to trust me." Keenan felt a momentary sense of determination, but knew the situation was far from resolved. Ellie's father was still inside the house, and taking her away wasn't an option without risking her safety. As Keenan wrestled with his next move, the deliberation was abruptly cut short. The front door of the Whitaker house burst open with a thunderous bang, jolting Keenan into action. Ellie's father emerged, dragging Hannah behind him. Keenan froze at the sight. Hannah's face was bruised and swollen, her movements unsteady as she struggled against his grip. Her one visible eye locked onto Keenan's, silently pleading for help. Keenan's heart pounded as he took a step forward. "Let her go!" he shouted, but the man ignored him, shoving Hannah into the passenger seat of a dark blue sedan. Tires screeched as the car sped away, leaving Keenan and Ellie standing in stunned silence. Ellie tugged at Keenan's sleeve, her voice trembling. "Please, don't let him hurt Mommy." Keenan crouched down, his hands resting gently on Ellie's shoulders. "Ellie, I need you to tell me everything. What's happening? Why is your dad doing this?" Ellie struggled to speak, her small frame shaking. Instead of words, she reached for Keenan's hand, leading him back toward the house. Keenan hesitated, but the urgency in Ellie's eyes spurred him forward. As they approached the doorway, Keenan braced himself. The acrid smell of burnt plastic filled the air, and shards of glass crunched beneath his boots. Inside, the scene was worse than he'd feared. Furniture was overturned, shattered picture frames littered the floor, and torn suitcases with clothes spilling out hinted at a hurried attempt to leave. Keenan scanned the wreckage, his heart heavy. "Ellie," he said gently, "I'm going to call the police, okay? They can help your mom. Is that all right with you?" Ellie nodded, her wide eyes filled with fear and hope. Keenan pulled out his phone and dialed 911. He spoke quickly but clearly, describing everything he'd witnessed: the violent abduction, Hannah's injuries, and the chaos inside the house. As he ended the call, the sound of sirens grew louder, and Keenan knelt beside Ellie. "The police are coming. You're safe now, I promise." Minutes later, patrol cars arrived, their flashing lights reflecting off the broken glass. Officers quickly secured the scene. A female officer with kind eyes and graying hair approached Ellie, kneeling to her level. "Hi, Ellie," she said softly. "I'm Officer Grace. Can you tell me what happened?" Ellie hesitated, her lip trembling. "Dad took Mommy. He hurts her, a lot." Officer Grace's expression grew serious. She turned to Keenan for more details, and he recounted the events as clearly as he could. "Thank you for calling us," Officer Grace said. She radioed her team, updating them on the situation. "We're locking down the neighborhood to stop him. Do you remember the car's make or license plate?" "It's a dark blue sedan, older model," Keenan said. "The front bumper's dented on the left side. He's tall, wearing a black suit, that's all I've got." Officer Grace nodded, jotting down notes. She turned back to Ellie. "Sweetheart, is there anyone else your dad might try to find? Anyone he could hurt?" Ellie's eyes widened in alarm. "Grandma," she exclaimed. "She lives nearby. What if Dad goes there?" Officer Grace immediately relayed this information to her colleagues. Some officers remained to secure the house, while others prepared to check on the grandmother. "Ellie," Officer Grace said gently, "will you come with us to help find your grandma's house?" Ellie hesitated, looking up at Keenan. Her small hands clung to his arm, unwilling to let go. Keenan knelt beside her. "I'll be right behind you," he said. "I'll follow in my truck, I promise." Reassured, Ellie climbed into the back seat of a patrol car. Keenan jogged to his delivery van, firing up the engine. Though his route was far behind, he knew this was more important. The convoy moved swiftly, patrol cars in the lead with Keenan close behind. His heart raced as they turned into the grandmother's cul-de-sac, only to find a dark blue sedan haphazardly parked in the driveway. Keenan's breath caught as he glanced toward the dark blue sedan. Hannah sat slumped in the passenger seat, her head leaning against the window, her bruises now more visible in the daylight. She looked weaker, barely conscious. Around the scene, neighbors gathered cautiously, some standing on their lawns, whispering, while others peered out from behind curtains. A few more daring individuals held up their phones, recording the tense situation. Ellie's father, noticing the growing crowd, turned his rage on them. "Mind your own business," he bellowed, picking up a small garden stone and hurling it toward the onlookers. They scattered, retreating into their homes. As the piercing sound of sirens drew closer, his demeanor shifted. Aggression turned to panic, and he darted back toward his car, clearly intending to flee with Hannah still inside. Keenan acted on instinct. Slamming his foot on the gas pedal, he maneuvered his delivery van into the driveway, blocking the sedan's escape. The screech of tires and flashing police lights signaled the arrival of backup. Officers poured out of their vehicles, weapons drawn. "Step out of the car with your hands up," an officer commanded through a megaphone. For a moment it seemed the man might try to ram his way out, but the sight of multiple officers aiming their weapons made him hesitate. Slowly, he opened the car door and stepped out, his hands raised. As the police closed in, his eyes landed on Keenan, who had stepped out of his truck. "You!" he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "This is your fault, you nosy delivery boy. I'll ruin you. You'll never work in this town again." Officers quickly restrained him, cutting off his tirade. Keenan felt a chill at the man's threats but held his ground, knowing he had done the right thing. Meanwhile, Ellie emerged from one of the police cars. Her face was a mixture of relief and fear as she scanned the scene. Spotting her mother still in the sedan, she broke away from the officer holding her hand and ran toward the vehicle. "Mommy! Mommy, are you okay?" she cried, knocking desperately on the window. Hannah stirred at the sound of her daughter's voice but was too weak to respond. An officer gently pulled Ellie back, reassuring her that paramedics would help her mother. As Ellie was led away, her father's demeanor shifted again. The aggressive man from moments earlier crumbled, falling to his knees on the lawn. Tears streamed down his face as he called out, "Ellie, baby, please! Daddy loves you! This is all a big misunderstanding." Keenan felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to believe in the sincerity of the man's tears, to hope there was still a shred of decency in him. But the image of Hannah's battered face and Ellie's terror silenced that hope. He reminded himself that abusers often used manipulation as a weapon. The police remained professional, placing the man in handcuffs despite his pleas. As officers retrieved the keys to the sedan and freed Hannah, Keenan stayed close to Ellie. She clung to his hand, her eyes fixed on her mother. As they helped Hannah to the porch, the front door opened to reveal an older woman, Hannah's mother, Ellie's grandmother. Her face was etched with worry, but it softened with relief at the sight of her daughter and granddaughter. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, rushing forward to embrace them both. She guided Hannah to a chair on the porch, quickly fetching water and a cold compress for her bruises. Ellie stayed close, resting her hand on her mother's arm as if reassuring herself that Hannah was safe. Keenan stood nearby, relieved that the immediate danger had passed but unsure of what would happen next. An officer approached the porch, introducing himself as Detective Miller. His calm demeanor and steady gaze brought a sense of order to the chaos. "Mrs. Whitaker," he began, "I know this is difficult, but we need to understand what happened. Can you tell us about your relationship with your husband?" Hannah took a deep breath, wincing as she shifted in her chair. Slowly, she began to recount their story, her voice a mixture of pain and resolve. "We've been married for 8 years, she started. "At first, Dennis was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, successful, a wonderful father. But things changed. His drinking started small, but it grew worse as the stress of his business increased. Then came the verbal abuse, the isolation, and eventually, the physical violence." Ellie sniffled quietly and pulled her closer. I stayed for years, making excuses, hoping he would change. But 3 years ago, Ellie saw him at his worst. That's when I knew I had to leave. I filed for divorce, but Dennis wouldn't accept it." Detective Miller nodded, taking notes. "And since then?" Hannah's voice trembled. "He's shown up unannounced, tried to control us. I even got a restraining order, but you saw how much that's worth." She gestured to her bruises. Keenan felt anger rise within him but kept his expression neutral. As Hannah continued, recounting Dennis's drunken visit that morning and his threats to take Ellie, Keenan couldn't help but think of the brand new items he'd found earlier. When the detective asked about the discarded school supplies, Hannah's eyes widened in realization. "Those were his," she said. "He planned to take Ellie, move her somewhere I couldn't find her, and start over like nothing had happened." Detective Miller's expression darkened. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. This will help us build a strong case." As Dennis continued shouting from the street, proclaiming his innocence, Keenan stepped forward. "Detective, I can provide testimony. I saw his behavior toward Ellie and his blatant racism toward me. And the new items in the trash, they were meant to erase any trace of his plan to take." The detective nodded. "Mr. Daniels, your account will be vital. We'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement." Just then, another officer approached. "We conducted an alcohol meter test on Dennis Whitaker. He's well over the legal limit." Detective Miller's jaw tightened. "That settles it. He'll be charged with driving under the influence, domestic violence, violating a restraining order, and attempted kidnapping." Keenan exhaled deeply, knowing this was far from over. But as he looked at Ellie, clinging tightly to her mother, he felt a sense of purpose. Whatever came next, he knew he had done the right thing. Detective Miller turned toward Hannah and Ellie. "Mrs. Whitaker, we'll need you and Ellie to come down to the station to give formal statements. Is there someone who can accompany you?" Hannah's mother, who had been hovering protectively nearby, stepped forward. "I'll go with them, of course." The detective nodded approvingly, then turned to Keenan. "Mr. Daniels, your involvement in this case was critical. Your actions today may have saved 2 lives. However, I understand you were on duty when this occurred." Keenan suddenly remembered his abandoned delivery route and the likely consequences. "Yes, sir. I should probably contact my company and explain the situation." As the group prepared to leave for the station, Keenan was overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions. Relief that Hannah and Ellie were safe, pride in knowing he had done the right thing, but also anxiety about what this might mean for his job and future. He followed the police cars in his delivery van, heading toward an uncertain future. The police station was a flurry of activity. Officers processed Dennis's arrest while detectives worked to finalize statements from Hannah, Ellie, and Keenan. The rescued trash bag containing the new items Dennis had discarded was now tagged as evidence. The sterile environment of the station, with its fluorescent lights and institutional walls, was a stark contrast to the quiet suburban streets where Keenan's day had started. Hannah sat in a chair, holding an ice pack to her bruised face, with Ellie curled up beside her. Hannah's mother hovered nearby, offering comforting words and worried glances. Keenan stood at a distance, still in his work uniform, feeling out of place amid the officers and detectives. After signing her statement, Hannah caught Keenan's eye and motioned for him to come closer. Her voice was soft but filled with gratitude. "Keenan, I don't even know where to begin. You put yourself at risk to help us. You've probably jeopardized your job, and I'm so sorry for involving you in this." Keenan shook his head, a small smile on his face. "Please don't apologize. I'm just glad you and Ellie are safe. That's what matters." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. Still, most people wouldn't have gotten involved. Keenan chuckled lightly. I've been delivering packages to your house for 2 years, but only today did I realize how much you were going through. I couldn't just walk away. Hannah smiled faintly despite her pain. It's almost like you were meant to be late today. Keenan nodded. Maybe there was a reason. I was working solo for the first time today. It's hard not to think everything aligned for a purpose. Their conversation was interrupted when a detective handed them their finalized statements to sign. As Hannah signed hers, she glanced at Keenan again. When this is over and things calm down, I'd like to thank you properly. Maybe dinner? Keenan, caught off guard, nodded. I'd like that. And if you ever need anything, just call. Though I hope you won't need my help again. At least, not in dire circumstances, he added with a teasing smile. Hannah laughed softly, a small but genuine moment of levity. We all need each other, she said warmly. As the officer excused them, Keenan's phone buzzed. Seeing his employer's number on the screen, he took a deep breath and answered. Keenan, this is Sarah from HR, came the response. Your van's GPS shows you're off route, and we've received calls about missed deliveries. What's going on? Keenan explained the morning's events, expecting reprimand but finding understanding instead. I see, Sarah said after hearing his account. That's quite a situation. Finish up at the station and complete as much of your route as you can. We'll discuss this further when you return to the depot. Relieved, Keenan ended the call. While there would likely be consequences, Sarah's understanding tone gave him hope that his job wasn't in immediate jeopardy. As Keenan prepared to leave the station, Ellie ran over to him. Keenan, are you leaving? Can we come with you in your truck? She asked, her eyes lighting up. Hannah approached, hesitant. Ellie, I don't think... But Keenan, seeing the hopeful look on Ellie's face, found himself nodding. If it's okay with your mom, I don't see why not. It's a bit cramped and smelly, though, he teased. Hannah's mother chimed in with a smile. We can always shower later. When will you ever get another chance to ride in a delivery van? Hannah, seeing her daughter's excitement, finally relented. All right, if Keenan doesn't mind. The ride back to the neighborhood was an unexpected blend of lightness and reflection. Ellie's questions about the truck's operation brought moments of laughter. As they pulled up to the Whitaker house, now peaceful under the afternoon light, Keenan helped them out of the truck. Ellie turned and hugged Keenan tightly. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but sincere. Hannah, her arm around Ellie, looked at him with gratitude. Thank you, Keenan, for everything. You have the purest heart. Keenan watched them enter their home, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. He climbed back into his van, knowing challenges still lay ahead, explanations to his employer, potential court proceedings, and Dennis's threats. But as he resumed his route, Keenan felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever came next, he knew he had made a difference, and that knowledge was enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more unforgettable stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.